Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Dylbozer's Den. Today, we will be discussing one of the angriest fucking bands of all time with their first release in 8 years. I am talking about Nails and their new album, Every Bridge Burning. 8 years, almost a decade. That's a lifetime in metal and hardcore, isn't it? You've had other bands such as Carcass and At the Gates that have released albums after a long gestation period, or have broken up, or have taken a hiatus, or anything like that. I don't think that was the initial plan with Todd and the gang. A lot of things have happened since 2016's You'll Never Be One of Us. You had a bout of writer's block and burnout that made the album take so long. You also had 2 members that left the band, and when you're a 3-piece, that's a lot. The former Taylor Young leaving as he was the drummer, and then you had John Gianelli on bass who left, who had been essentially forming members of the band. And you also had this global pandemic that hit us all sideways for a few years, which helped put even more time in between releasing product and touring and all of these things. And it seems that he might have went back and listened to a lot of the records that he grew up listening to. There's a lot of influence from those early records, such as stuff from Motorhead, Van Halen. It's all on here. I would even hedge a bet there's some Judas Priest that was getting listened to in the creation of this album. Sometimes it takes new blood to help, push a project forward and to help feel revitalized and, energized with it. Every so often you get to play with new musicians that may have more in common with you, that allow you to progress forward and create, new art or a new version of this thing that's already been in place for so long. So on the lineup end, obviously we have Todd Jones back on guitar and vocals. He's the lone remaining original member. This is Todd's band. I've thought that since day one. New bassist Andrew
Solis,
who's also a member of Apparition and Despise You. You have Carlos Cruz on drums, which seems to be the first person that Todd really tied together with on this record to help, create what Nails was going to be. Carlos has done work with Warbringer, Skeletal Remains. I believe he's done some work with Machine Head as well as many other bands that he's worked with. I've seen his name involved with a lot of projects throughout the years. And then you have Shelby Lermo on guitars, who has spent a lot of time in bands such as Ulthar and Vastum, in which those are 2 completely different sounding bands as well. Ulthar being this hyper technical, very old school sounding band, and Vastum being a little bit more in like the caveman death doom kind of thing. Both great bands, and you should check those out as well. With recording wise and production wise, I won't spend a ton of time on this because it's been the same person working with the band their entire career, which is Kurt Ballou. His background, from reviews I've done on here, from reviews we've done on the Riff Worship Pod. Kurt Ballou's name is associated with so many acts. Just take a look at it. Obviously, he's obviously a songwriter and guitarist in Converge, but he's also the owner of God City Studios in Salem, Massachusetts. And it seems that Nails recorded this album over like the Halloween period when Salem was the busiest it could ever be with all the tourists. On the mastering side, you have Nick Townsend of Intrasonic Sound, who has worked with Severus, Upon Stone, and Cruelty. You have Zach Weeks, who engineered, who's done work with High on Fire, Gatecreeper, Old Man Gloom. And then you have Carlos Cruz, as I mentioned, is the new drummer with the band, but he's also done some engineering work on it as well. On the artwork side, you have a returning Jeff Whitehead, Rest. He worked with the band on the 2016 release. It's always great to see his work on anything. I love his tattoo style. I love his artwork. I love how his characters all have a certain vibe to them. But as I said, first album in 8 years. It's already setting up to be fucking heavy. I think we all know what to expect when it comes to a Nails record. For an album length of 18 minutes, they actually shortened it from the prior record, which was like 21 minutes. You've either sped up, you've trimmed the fat even more. And one great thing about Todd and his songwriting is there's not a lot of fat on these records. It's very straight. It's to the point. Dude knows how to write a fucking great song. Like, these songs are structured so well, so catchily. A lot of them sound like very traditional heavy metal song structures. I get it's a blending of death, grind, hardcore, power violence, and so on and so forth. There's some thrash influences there as well. So let's get into what we're all here to talk about, right? The riffs. And this album is loaded with them. The intro riff of Every Bridge Burning, which takes like a foundation of almost what Angel of Death did on Rain and Blood, and somehow Todd and gang has pushed it faster and harder. That song also has a riff at about 57 seconds in that is total Bay Area worship that would make Gary Holt fucking proud to have written it. You get to Give Me the Painkiller, which is absolutely my favorite track on the whole entire record. The intro riff is amazing. It's these harmonized, almost, as I mentioned before, Judas Priest style kind of lead lick there. And then you go to Lacking the Ability to Process Empathy, which not only being a really cool song title, which I think we've all met people like that, or maybe we've all been that person throughout our lives at certain points. It's got riffs upon riffs in it. 16 seconds in on this track is the riff of the record. My favorite riff on the album. It's just a great, groovy, kind of moshy riff. Then you have the track No More Rivers to Cross, which is a total doom and like Swedish death style track. Makes me think of Dismember. I know Entombed gets thrown around a lot when it comes to like HM2 bands, and Nails is no stranger to using an HM2 or an HM2 style pedal to push their amplifiers. However, Dismember was always meaner sounding, always, a little bit more aggressive sounding than I think Entombed was. Entombed sounded a little more wilder, maybe more like a party to me, whereas Dismember was just lean and mean and vicious. My favorite Dismember album is Indecent and Obscene. There's riffs on this song alone that make me think of that record, and anytime I've heard it. Not only do you get this Dismember style riffing on this track, but you also get a John Christ era Danzig riff at 2 minutes and 13 seconds in. That's just fucking cool, and it's wild to see how that blends in there. So we've talked about the riffs, which is the most important part on this record to me, that and probably the vicious vocal approach, which we'll get into later. But there's some solos in this record that are really good. Let's go back to Gimme the Painkiller. You've got some blistering fucking solos after this great vocal break that just screams, let me do my goddamn thing, and then just kicks right into these blistering solos. And I think it's a trade back and forth. I had the chance to see the band live recently, and it definitely felt and seemed that way live. So I'm assuming it was recorded that way, but great solos, really adds to the track, doesn't sound like wank. The solos all sound like these hyper aggressive things that just add to the total chaotic nature of this album. Then you get to a track like Dehumanized, and 52 seconds in, you get these great giant bending solos there, these kind of rock and roll super bends. And then I Can't Turn It Off has a total Fast Eddie Clarke style solo at about 1 minute and 57 seconds in. Talked about guitars, talked about solos. Let's get into the bass and the drums. Nails has always been a very guitar-centric band and a very aggressive, hyper-focused band. And there's not a lot of room for bass kind of lines or anything like that. So the bass is really holding a fundamental and just sounding like this really gnarly, distorted, almost lead weight kind of tone. It's helping push the guitars and this machine moving forward at 1,000 miles an hour. But there are also a couple points in this record where the bass does kind of stick out a little bit, but just understand that the bass is kind of holding together everything like glue on this record. You've got Punishment Map that you can really feel the weight of the bass all over the track. Dehumanized, that's got this great drum and bass intro that helps really stick out, and you get a tonal center of everything that's going on. Then you've got No More Rivers to Cross, which again, I was such a big fan of, but the verses feel like they're almost structured for the bass to be felt and heard a little bit. That might be the most present point to my ear that the bass is on the record. But all things aside, Andrew's done a great job of holding the low end down on these records, and he did the job that was needed. And I like that from a bass player as well. With bass already being taken care of, let's get on to what could be one of the most important parts of an extreme metal record, which is the drums. With a legacy as fast and as intense that this band has laid out over the last couple decades, anybody that steps into those drum shoes has to be able to bring the intensity and bring the power, and not only have to mirror that intensity, but also be able to push everything forward to even greater speeds and, more intense moments and change the dynamics up a little bit. Carlos has definitely done a really good job with that. tracks such as Imposing Will, which is right out the gate. You've got this blasting and pounding, just like great opening track to this. Then you have Lacking the Ability to Process Empathy. Carlos uses groove that makes me think of like a Rise era Sepultura on there to change things up a little bit. And then you get the Dehumanized, which, uses a D beat, which adds more dynamics to a record as intense and fast as this is. Then you have I Can't Turn It Off that has a drum solo even for a little bit from like 1:12 to 1:17. Absolutely tremendous performance on this record that Carlos has done. And live, he is a fucking machine. Let's get on to the vocals here. Todd sounds different on this record, but in the best way possible. Definitely sounds like he's taken a page out of Jeff Walker's book a little bit, like a lot of tonal characteristics that are very similar to, later era Jeff Walker. And goddamn, is he sound aggressive. He's cutting through the mix. He sounds really good. Every line has venom attached to it. He believes and pushes every single lyric that he writes for this album. As a whole, the album is fucking tremendous. I can't say enough about the production on this. Kurt Ballou always does a tremendous job. Everything sounds good. Everything is loud. Everything is clear. Everything is just structured together so well. This is a no fat record, and I'm sure this thing was fun as hell to make. I look forward to hearing more of Kurt's productions. Anytime he's tied to a project, it's like, what is he going to bring out next? But overall, this record, absolutely fantastic. Tremendous record. I've gone back and listened to this album over and over and over again, and I don't get bored with it. I wish a lot of bands would really get to the point with a lot of tracks, even with bands that I listen to that have longer track listings and longer album links. Todd nails Every Bridge Burning. Check it the fuck out.